Welcome to the SPL Rundown. I'm your host, Apam, here with JmacTucker, the caster for our Smite Pro League here. Toli, a former SPL caster and former SPL player. And, of course, our Twitter extraordinaire here, Anatoliy and Vonnson, is joining us as well. Be sure to stick around a little bit later for my interview with the solo laner for the Phase 2 playoff champions, the Tartarus Titans. Benji came through, and we had a pretty good discussion about Phase 1 and Phase 2, and also look back on his Smite career on the whole as well. But first, Phase 3 has started, and we just got through Week 1 last weekend, so I think it's time we dive in a little bit to those games, starting with the Jade Dragons versus the Valhalla Valkyries. And this week, I think, we say the Valks are looking good, fighting better in the early games, and I think we really see them do the best job they've done of that so far this whole season in this first game here. I think they even had an XP lead in game 1 around 15 minutes, and they're really trying their best here. Unfortunately, it seems like the team fights from the Jade Dragons were just a little bit better. I think I remember in game 2 there was a 3-man Yorm knockup that basically sort of sealed the deal in my mind. Are we seeing what we want to see from the Valks here, especially now that Phase 3 has started off, in your guys' opinion?
I think so. It's so difficult for a team like the Valkyries. Like it's a bunch of veteran players, and you have Johnny coming out of the minor league in the jungle. So he's been having a lot of struggles, I would say, trying to fit in with the meta versus playing what he used to play. Because like when Johnny was SCC, this dude was like the Baka, Ao Kuang, Kali god. Like that's the 3 gods he slammed every single game, and nobody could ever touch him. Then he came to the SPL, and teams kind of just told him, yeah, those gods don't work here. And he's been having a rough time kind of finding his home. But I think as of recent, Johnny's really been finding it. The Erlung Shen has kind of been like one of his better gods as of recent. He's made a really strong rotation with that. Outside of there, I mean, it's mostly just been trying to find their identity again, because they found it at the start of the phase, which was like all team fights. Like we're all about the late game team fights, and they were doing good. If they could get there, their team fights were insane. But now they're not able to make it to those late games, so they've re-envisioned themselves to be this more early game team. And we see it like really shine with the Dragons, and then the later set against the Leviathans. I think right now their biggest problem is they just kind of forgot what the late game is like and what to do with that lead.
Sure. Toli or Vonnie?
Okay, so basically, I'm not very thrilled with the Valkyries, unfortunately, because like they've had all this time during the break to prepare for this matchup, and what did they show us in the very first minute? Just like Zero's kind of forgetting how to mid lane at level 2, getting blinked on by Sam, dying unnecessarily. This is kind of mistakes that you see out of a ranked player that doesn't know how to play mid, right? Or something along those lines. Not out of SPL players. So we need to see those kinds of mistakes being cleaned up. It's the Phase 3 already. If they want to get any sort of like fear of not picking the Valkyries first for the draft of the top 2 teams, because Lord knows that Valkyries getting top 2 would be better chances of me winning the lottery, right? So I want to see like better improvements. And so far, they're kind of regressing now immediately. To be fair, though, they kind of like picked up from those early game mistakes and was slowly coming back into it. But the better teams just know how to close out games compared to the Valkyries.
Vonnie, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on something that JMac said in regards to them having to find their identity again. And I think they did for just a tiny bit before there was the major meta shift with Gilgamesh's release and Osiris jungle and stuff like that. Johnny has never been a guy that, as good of a jungler as he is, that has been known to play tank junglers. He's more of a hyper carry play style.
Yeah.
But obviously, he's still inhibited by his ping. And also the meta just really does not enable that style of play. We'll still see, obviously, as we go forward with this patch, but with the patch that they were playing on, those junglers still dominated in that play style. But I will say that it was nice to see them get a little bit more loose in drafts. We saw Zeros pull out the Ra, which we haven't seen from a lot of people. He also put out the Aphrodite in the last game of that set. And so Zeros, even if you go all the way back to his PK days, has been a guy who sees Smite in a pretty particular way. He wants to play what he wants to play. And I think allowing him to, play those gods, try those gods, and to find his comfort is the real core. Because I do think Johnny has a playstyle that's a bit more malleable to what Zeros can do than inversely.
Yeah, we spent sort of this first period talking about the Valks. Anything stick out surprising to you about the J Dragons, or was this just sort of business as usual for them? This is the team that you are sort of expected to beat. I think, if you lose to this team, there's a lot of questions that are going to be asked. So, is there anything special that you thought you saw from the Dragons in particular at all, or just another day in the office?
I think for them, it's mostly just kind of another day out there. The Valkyries are a team that you can kind of experiment a little bit with, just because the likelihood of some of these top teams losing to them is really low. So we did get to see the Gilded Arrow Yorm come out of Final K.
Right.
I know that a lot of players have kind of been experimenting with that as of recent, and I mean, it showed that I can do some work for it. But I think outside there, it just showed that they still have some kind of play along with their drafts. But for the most part, I think it was just kind of business as usual. I mean, the Valks getting an early lead, even despite the first blood, and being able to hold out for a half hour, maybe shows a little bit of weakness in the Dragons' early game. But then you jump into game 2, and it's just like nothing ever happened in game 1, and it's like a 20 or 22 minute win for them. So,
yeah, the other thing that is sort of a caveat for this whole week, I think, is that in my mind, it's a bit of a lame duck week, right? Like, there's this new patch, I think a relatively big patch coming that's basically going to essentially set the what I would expect to be the world's meta, after a couple of weeks, right? So, this week, are you going to show anything, that you're working on for this new patch stuff, or probably not going to pull anything out, maybe just have some fun things. So, there might not be too much to glean from the picks and bans that we see in this week overall, right? Just because, there's a big patch coming, and I imagine most of the players are either prepping to play in that patch, or, just not really willing to bring anything that they might have been prepping for this sort of lame duck week, right?
Yeah.
Especially coming off of the playoffs as well. Like, we even heard Benji talk in the interview after their barely win against the Scarabs, how they only had one scrim during the break. So I think like a lot of teams took that course as well. It's like, oh, everything's going to change. We don't really have to practice too much in this week, since it's better off to play maybe the practice in the PTS and forward.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for most of the roles, nothing is really going to change. Like, support's not changing with this one. Even with Benevolence coming up, I think there's still going to be a lot of testing before that even comes through. Gods aren't going to change. Even the Emoji nerfs aren't really going to do anything to her in competitive scene. Like, even like, I think Neil put it best. It's just like, yeah, the cooldown kind of sucks, but like, you're usually waiting till that comes off anyways. Like, it doesn't change the character all that much.
Right.
Solo lane, Benji highlighted that it really wasn't going to be any different. It's still going to be like Serb, Sobek, RDO, and then like maybe one warrior, if even that there. So like, I think like the main dynamic that's going to change is going to be the jungle, and that can then change the mid and even the hunter role. That's where it's going to probably really spice up. I think even Shinto alluded to the fact that we might see some hunters mid, probably like Uller after his buffs, and then all of the items that make Uller good. So maybe around there we'll see some differences.
Sure.
Paul and Darter's definitely licking their hands on the Uber picks here. Seriously.
Jeez.
All right, let's move on to the next set of the week. The Olympus Bolts versus the Oni Warriors. This is a pretty wild set, in my opinion. I think sort of like a clean game for each team. I think a bit of a surprise that the Oni Warriors took game 1. But I think it was sort of, the first 2 games were real clean. 1 win for the Oni Warriors, 1 win for the Bolts. And then it just turned into a bloodbath. I think in game 3, there was like something like 40 or 50 kills overall.
Oh, yeah.
Which, to be honest, this season is kind of a rarity. I feel like I've seen a lot more like 9-0 games than I've seen, 28-22 games, right?
Yeah.
So I think, everyone sort of got the cleanliness out of them, and it was time to sort of roll around in the mud, I guess. Very, very back and forth game, I think, with a lot of kills. And just, as we say a lot, the game turns on a knife's edge. And, one fight really does have a huge amount of impact in these games. Are you happy from what you saw with the Oni Warriors in this set? And we kind of seen on the flip side of that, we've seen sort of the Bolts regress a little bit. I think, especially heading into Phase 2 playoffs. Are there some signs that this team isn't as strong as we thought they were when they were on that big win streak in Phase 2?
I don't think so. I think coming back into Phase 3, seeing the Bolts kind of have a stumble in game number 1 is not the huge surprise. I mean, we saw even the Dragons against the Valkyries. Sure. They struggled for the first early half. I think it's more so a show of the Warriors finally kind of coming together as a team and really figuring out what's been working for them, which that core 3 was like Kuzumbo, Erlung, Shen, Cerberus really worked out for them, and you saw it immediately in the next time they played where Kuzumbo was never allowed to be touched again. Yeah. I think this is just the Warriors finally actually stepping up and playing their play style, which is this very highly aggressive, especially out of dual lane. Like when Neil gets to play Neil, the Warriors are a devastating team to fight up against. Like dual lane just doesn't stand a chance. It then allows mid lane to just kind of do whatever they want to do. I mean, Hera, Aphrodite out of mid. I mean, you're going to see some nonsense come from this team. And they're one of the teams in this league that play unconventional compared to everybody else. They're not going to pick... they will pick the meta stuff if it's available, but when the emoji gets banned away, when, the Tiamat gets banned away, they've got this strange god pool compared to every other team and for a lot of these players. And I think that's what really makes this team shine, is the fact that they're not sticking to the norm and they can make that work. The problem is when Dardes doesn't get to that carry stage, and when Dardes is playing these non-carry style mages, I think that's when the team kind of struggles a bit. You saw it with the Aphrodite in game 2.
Sure. Bring
out the Aphrodite, and Dardes really didn't get to do anything. I think it's mostly the Warriors stepping up, less so than the Bolts regressing.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there on JMac. The game 2 Aphrodite, it was a little bit of a defensive style out of him compared to the way Venenu played that Scylla, just super aggressive. The damage was just way higher than the healing could ever hope to be in that game 2, but they adapted really well in game 3, allowing the Scylla to go through again and heavily shutting down the Scylla damage, didn't even come close to the same amount of numbers. And it literally did come down to that last team fight, actually, in game number 3. The backline from the Bolts finally survived one engagement by kiting by themselves, while the frontline from the Bolts outplayed literally everybody. Haddix came in with the clutchest blink pluck ever, catching Dardas by surprise, didn't even beat it, and actually that was what caused that last fight to go the Bolts' way.
Ronnie, your thoughts?
For me, the Bolts, my thoughts is I think it was the perfect storm for the Warriors to win that game 1. I think with them, obviously, Neil is going to be coming down. Still unsure about the situation between Fred and Dardes, but either way, with Neil being able to get here and he won't play on such ping and be more comfortable, I think that'll be good for them. And parts to the Bolts, Awesome Jake was the person that I had my eye on the most.
Oh, yeah.
Because even going back to the playoffs in their matchup against the Leviathans, I think we're seeing a concerted effort from the Bolts in Row to actually evolve Jake as a player and increase his god pool and playstyles for a really, really long time. And granted, the meta and support was a bit restrictive. You had gods like Yamoja, Ymir, Fenrir a bit more on the fringe, and Sobek before he was getting flexed to solo kind of dominate the role. But now with it being a more open, you're seeing people pull out the circuits. The Terras are now getting a lot more play, and those were gods that we never saw Jake play. The only thing that he really played besides those meta supports was Ares, and if you watch how they drafted before the playoffs, they made an effort to prioritize Jake's supports pick top 2 in pretty much every single game. But going on now, we've seen him play Circuit, we've seen him play Terra, we've seen him play Odin, gods that he typically doesn't play. And since he's not on that comfort, you see them struggling and faltering a little bit more. But I think in the long term, once he actually gets more comfortable playing more versatile, I think they'll be a lot better for it.
Yeah, you bring up a pretty good point there, Vonnie. I didn't really think about it that way because I feel like we've just seen so many SPL level supports pull out the Circuit, and it's nothing super surprising sort of in the grand scheme of things. But specifically about Awesome Jake, I don't think I remember him playing Circuit support that often. So It's a good thing to point out there.
If there's an aggressive god, I think Jay can honestly play it. You know,
Sure,
back in his days of playing like Thor support, tier support, like my man wants to hold the W key and run at you. And when you have Lasbro being comfortable on the Nemesis and Jake being able to run at you with Lasbro side by side, holding hands down the field, like they're just having a good time. And I think the Bolt synergy is really showing itself in Season 8, even like coming off of this one.
Yeah, I think that synergy can really be highlighted from the quadra kill in game number 3. Like, Jake's play on that Circuit is astounding. I think the few supports who are playing that Circuit more often than not, Yu, Jake, and I think I'm trying to think if there's a third big one. Inbound. Inbound's probably the other one that I can think of. Between those three, I mean, you see plays out of them that you would only really see previously out of junglers, because Circuit really wasn't a support god for the longest time, and then she was for a short while when like Lono's mask was like absurd, and you were just running like the three assassin solos or the 3 assassin supports that came out of that time frame. But now you're seeing this god come back even without the Lonos being there. So like I think the mechanic play where it used to be me support, me big area, make sure smack giant circle in front of me or around me. It's gone away from there. I mean, you're throwing gods like Fenrir, Circuit in the mix of it. Naja when it was a thing. Support's becoming definitely a highly mechanical role, and being able to master a god like Circuit, like Jake and Yu and Inbound have, is really starting to show some favor, especially just because that god still technically can flex for a few teams back to jungle, like Lasbra. And it's one thing I highlight every time I see that god locked in for the bolts on the desk is this probably will go to Jake, just because that's where Circuit is always going. But you can't you can't discount the fact that Lasbra might just want to grab this god for himself because he's so good on it. Hard carried the bolts in one of their games. Like with the last game of their set, he had like a game 3 Circuit pop off. So yeah, I think this Circuit support is really showing a lot of prowess for a lot of these support players. It's really been able to elevate the Leviathans and the bolts.
The Camelot Kings versus the Atlantis Leviathans, and man, the troubles for the Kings sort of keep piling on here. A pretty convincing 2-0 win from the Levi's, and I think the Levi's are sort of one of the only teams that's going to feel really comfortable just leaving Hell open, right? Because if it ever gets to them, Shinto's just going to pick it, and they sort of, I don't know, they counterpicked the Hell super well. I think they picked Odin Serb, maybe both games, at least game 1 for sure they picked it.
It was Odin Serb and then Circuit.
So there's just anti-healing everywhere, I think. Those picks, like if you're a Hell, what are you even doing in these games? And as expected, the Kings sort of drop it. I think I expected the Kings to play sort of a little bit closer, but it was just a very clean set here from the Levi's. This I think is probably a good sign for the Levi's, right? Beating a top 4 team, or what we would have previously considered a top 4 team, so cleanly. Is that something that you think the Levi's are going to look to build upon as we head throughout the rest of Phase 3?
I think so. I mean, I think the Leviathans have been on an uphill even with their loss to the Titans during the Phase 2 finals. I think this is a Leviathans team that's been taking a long time to really grow, and ever since they've added Zapman to the team, they have just been getting better and better. Their shot calls have been so much cleaner as of recent times. Their drafts have really cleaned up, because, I mean, if you look at the Leviathans team, take them 1 year ago, you could have called every single god they were going to lock in every single game, no matter what was banned, because teams weren't just going to ban it because they knew what they were going to pick and they had already developed the meta against it. Now you kind of never know what you're going to get against Leviathans. They've been able to increase their god pool, and what used to be a team that kind of followed the meta, and then once they got to that point and they mastered what that meta was, the game had already moved on like 2 stages from there, and they were kind of playing in the past. Now this is almost like a team that's kind of breaking the current meta. Like, they say, okay, here's what's good, what can we do to shut that down? Hell being like one of the biggest ones now. Hell RTO, even they established kind of RTO coming back. This is a team that's been breaking the meta more than often and finding ways to make sure to shut down what's good. And I think that was a perfect showcase of Hell gets picked for solo lane. This is how we're going to answer to it. And I think they executed it really well.
Yeah, I think Leviathans are on a league of their own after Zapman. Originally, I thought it was going to be like the Kings and the Titans making like this sick, miraculous comeback after Phase 1 Dragons victory in the playoffs. But then Zapman joining, I'm like, wait a second, something's afoot over here. And we clearly see in the picks and bans, like they don't care about the meta stuff, like letting the hell go through. I think in the first game, they banned something like 3 out of 5 target bans against Genetics, trying to make him feel a little bit less comfortable, kind of putting him in this position where he picks Terra game number 2, and everybody's building anti-healing. It's not just like the Serket, the Serb Odin, right? Like Panitum and Shinto, they're building anti-healing either in their first or second slot, no matter what god they're playing. So they have a game plan and they execute it even before they even get into the game. And it's looking very clean for the Leviathans. Like the way they're progressing from Phase 1, Phase 2, and now who knows, we might see Phase 3 go all the way.
Yeah. And before I comment on the Kings, I also do just want to continue on to what they're saying about the Leviathans. I think you can't really understate just how much Zab's veteranship has positively impacted their team, not just in draft, but in their late game shot calling. There's a lot of objective 50-50s that they take. There's a lot of aggressive pushes because sometimes you can't always get a calculated, perfectly orchestrated team fight.
Right.
Sometimes you just gotta have faith in yourself and say, I'm gonna push my buttons better than them. And I think Zap is kind of the epitome of that. Even in times where he doesn't execute, he's always gonna have the confidence to go for it. And he really has reshaped the culture of this team. And in their drafts, we saw Paniton play Susano, who's a god we haven't seen in ages. Them allowing the hell through, Rangyu's playing stuff like Odin and Serket, when there's other picks up that he traditionally default to if they didn't have a guy like Zatman in their ear, you know, telling them to have this confidence to go out on the limb and to trust themselves. And as far as the Kings, every time I see the Kings lose, I think my initial reaction is always, man, like they've beaten themselves. I think their biggest enemy is themselves. And for me, I think it is in the draft. I think they're really, really stubborn in how they address counter picks and things like that. They have a really interesting way of drafting, whereas a lot of teams, like for instance, right, you see them in a first pick position. They'll look to maybe ban out Odin and Serb and force your hand to ban Hell because you don't want to allow them Hell without counter picks. The Kings say, we invite you to counter pick this pick, because in doing so, we know what you're going to go and we'll kind of counter the counters. But sometimes I feel like they don't full commit to that. And then you leave variety on a hell pick, which has been nerfed, on a hell pick that isn't as strong as it was when he last put it out. Since we've last seen variety play hell, majority of the hells in the SPL have been in the mid lane, where she could benefit from the, you know, really strong mage itemization. But you pick her into like 3 counters every game and you just say, good luck, Godspeed. And we see that, you know, they just kind of got snowballed throughout both of those games and didn't really have a good showing at all.
Yeah, I think, especially with healing, right? If you are counterpicking like anti-heal into healing, every god has healing, right? Like all the hunters build some amount of lifesteal. Every mage builds at least one lifesteal item, I think, even in sort of like the power pen build, right? So all of that sort of like incidental healing that, you know, might have given you an extra like 10% of survivability chance just also gets negated too, right? So I feel like a lot of times when you think, oh, we know that they're going to pick anti-heal to counter us, it's not as effective as you think, because sort of the incidental things add up over time and you just sort of lose ground over and over again.
I mean, it's one of those things like anti-heal as an item and a stat itself, like the items that you can pick up for it, especially for mages and assassins, now that we're going to start seeing some more assassins come through. I mean, Brawler's Beat Stick is just a good stat stick in general. Then you throw 50% anti-heal, you get Divine Ruin, ton of power, pen, anti-heal with it. And because of the gods that are meta right now, especially for mid, Divine Ruin is just almost a staple item that any mid laner can pick up. Even if there's a single like low tier self-healing god, like say like a Hercules or a tier or something like that gets locked in, you can pick up that Divine Ruin because it's not going to stunt your build any, and you can just say, okay, cool healing Hercules, whatever, we're just going to kill you anyways. So I think anti-heal as a whole is just so good right now that like you can just build it when on just about anything. Even if they're only building lifesteal of any kind, I think it's just a good stat to have.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that the main problem also is like how you can allow the strength of the healing to really shine, and that's by applying the healing out of combat when those anti-healing items doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And they tried to do that in game number 1 by having the Giannis for the mobilities, portal people out, give them the threshold for the movement speed. It just didn't really work out for them with how the Leviathans were able to grip that early game. The Hell got shut down from the get-go. There wasn't really many rotations that big man can do in either side lane. Zap was very safe on the ROM, and he had a field day, honestly, the whole week, actually. And the Leviathans, they just seem to have like an answer even for anything, even though like they knew the variety was going to get shut down. They didn't let that Hell go for free, knowing that, oh, they're not going to pick Odin into it. They wanted to enable the Giannis. It just didn't work out for them in that game.
Yeah. The other thing that I like that you guys mentioned was sort of Zap providing this sort of confidence boost for the Leviathans. And, one of my favorite sort of sports personalities, Bill Simmons, has this thing called the irrational confidence guy. I think when that person on your Smite team it sort of has to be your ADC, I feel like, just to be like irrationally confident and always go for, the 1v1s or just like, push the fights a little bit. And I think Zap having sort of the pedigree, the 2-time and all that stuff just sort of imbues that confidence for the rest of the team too. So even if, the call may not be the best call, right, sort of percentage-wise, win percentage-wise at the time, I think everyone on the team is a bit more ready to sort of commit to those calls, right, in the end game. And I think that sort of commitment, even if it's not the right call, is always just better than people being on different pages. The Tartarus Titans versus the Oni Warriors. Tartarus Titans coming off of their Phase 2 playoff wins. They sort of keep on with their winning ways. And I just got to ask, why are people giving Paul Tiamat? Are there just too many?
I don't know, man. Like, I said it on the desk so many times. There was even a meme that got put out on Twitter because of it. Like, you cannot be giving Paul Tiamat. He played it 7 games in a row and won 6 of those 7. And if I remember correctly from the stats I pulled, he was like 20 kills, 6 deaths, and some like 30 plus or whatever assists that he had with it. I mean, 7 games and you have 6 deaths. I think it's time you finally ban the god.
I mean, and it's not like, you ban the gods and he doesn't have, the next thing up in the pool isn't great or anything, right? Because it just means he gets Raijin or I guess Hell or, Scylla or, whatever god Paul wants to play more again, Persephone. I mean, there's just the whole mage pool is kind of wide open for him. But still, I think you still have to just ban the Tiamat, right?
You just got to ban Tiamat. And yeah, the next argument I think Agro pointed out was just like, it's a pick your poison against Paul. Do you want to, die to the Tiamat or do you want to die to the Raijin or do you want to die to this or that? I think it's just teams aren't paying enough attention to Paul because you're seeing him in so many of these mid and late game fights where he's just going untouched. Like nobody is even looking at Paul. And he's coming out of these games with 30, 40,000 player damage all the time. And it's just nobody's ever looking at him. It may not be because they're not trying to look at him or they're thinking, oh, maybe Lee Cyclone is the problem. His front line is just almost impenetrable. I mean, you get Aurora and Benji throwing in there. Like, how are you ever going to break past that front line, especially when Aurora is like first picking Khepri all the time at this point? Like, that is their number 1 first pick of this phase. And even towards the latter half of phase 2 is like Khepri's been like one of their staple picks. And when you can't get past the Khepri to get to Paul, and even if you do get to Paul, hey, here's a Khepri. But now you can't just deal with Paul. Now you have Cyclone Spin there too. And I don't know, man. This Titans team is so hard to draft against just because of how flexible Paul is, how open the mid lane god pool is, makes it almost impossible to really ban against him. It's one of those, you just have to ban one, and if your first pick, take the other as quick as you can and just throw them on something a little bit lower.
Sure.
I think you answered your own concern about Paul and the Tiamat. It is the front line, like you mentioned. It's like they're just not going to let them get to Paul. And even if they do, Paul can get himself out of danger if he needs to. I think these teams kind of forgot about Tiamat a little bit in the sense that after, I think, a recent nerf a couple patches ago, teams might not have been scrimming against Tiamat, so it might have been actually forgotten about. And like Agro mentioned, like you mentioned, it's just like pick your poison against Paul. I'd rather see him play Tiamat maybe than against like a hero that's going to two-shot me in some stages of the game. At least you know what's coming. And you've been scrimming more against Tiamat than I think you have been against Hebo.
Sure.
Yeah.
Bonnie?
Yeah, the Titans. All right, so first I have to say this: when this Titan team were first trying out new junglers, and I think everyone kind of knew early on that Scary D long term would be a good fit for this team. I personally thought that them not going for Sino over layers was a absolutely terrible decision. I have a complete bias towards them, admittedly, so Aurora is my favorite player. And I was like, man, I really wish they would have went for Sino. I think he gives them the macro shot calling, the leadership that they need. And Aurora, I thought, was struggling a little bit this season, and I thought that getting back with the jungler he was comfortable with before with Sino and having someone to lead this team would be really, really good. And they got layers and they won in pretty convincing fashion. I was like, okay, maybe that's a bit of a fluke. But as the ball kept rolling and they were gaining momentum, they go in the playoffs and kind of beat everyone pretty convincingly. Then they come out and take this Titans team down. And I have to say that I was completely wrong. And in this game, Aurora being a pretty aggressive player as he is, right, is known for he dies often, right? He gets involved, he does it early and he does it often, and he dies, but he doesn't mind trading his life to bait and create space for his team. Aurora went through both of these games without dying once. He played Kepri in the first one and Odin in the second, who are two drastically different playstyles. They do very different things on the map, and he executed on each of them incredibly well. And Layers ended up being a perfect fit for this team because he's a jungler who just has that killer instinct. If Layers can do anything well, that's find your backline and kill it. In doing so with Benji and the amount of space that Aurora creates, you have an all-time great backline with composed of Cyclone and Paul. They're going to do their job regardless, and I think they were at the start of this year. And now that Aurora has found his stride, Layers is able to do his job because he has such a strong front line around them that it just compounds how well Cyclone and Paul have been playing. And I think that's why we see this team look so dominant.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I think one of the things now, I don't know if they were being a little bit glib about it or if they were like being legitimately serious, but like in Cyclone and Benji's interviews, both of them said that they weren't playing at their peak yet. Like Cyclone said, yeah, our duo lane's really not that great yet. Like we still got a long way to go. And then at the end, Benji was like, yeah, we played bad today. And that was in like their set at the latter half of it, the studio game that we'll talk on later.
Yeah, sure.
But the fact that like that is the level that they come out with during the interviews, whether it's in a joking manner or not, I think is a scary thought for some of these teams going later in the phase.
I think every player has to answer that question in that exact manner, though, to be fair, because obviously you don't want to be perceived as too cocky and arrogant. And at the same time, you want to leave like a little bit of suspense and ambiguity in the air for other teams to kind of guess, like, wait a sec, this is not even their final form. It's like fighting Frieza, man.
Well, and also like you need to have that ego. I think it's like necessary to compete at the highest levels to have that ego to say like
that's in the game.
I think maybe if you throw like Aurora Paul, they might say, or even like Layers, you throw it like, oh yeah, dude, we're playing lights out right now. I think they might say it, but maybe because it's Cyclone and Benji, like just how they naturally like perceive themselves and like how they just project themselves out there. It's just like, yeah, we're just out here playing, man. Like that's just the vibe they give is we're just out here playing right now.
Sure.
Either way, Cyclone's first interview ever? Question mark.
I think we've had a Cyclone interview before this one, but that was like the first one that we really got from him. I think even Benji, that might have been the first one that we were able to get from him.
Yeah,
being in studio helps.
It just seems,
believe it or not,
it seems to me a little bit that saying that you've sort of reached your peak is just what's it called? Bad luck. Right?
Yeah,
maybe so.
You don't want to jinx it, or maybe you do want to jinx it. I don't know. I don't know how that works. What the jinx is? If you say like you peaked and you're at the highest level of your skill, I don't know. It just feels like bad juju to me.
Yeah, you don't want to confess that because it's only downhill from there. Like if you can't go up further, like what's there to come?
Yeah, that's my feeling about it. Any final thoughts here about this set between the Titans and the Oni Warriors?
Funny little piggyback note on the previous thing that Vin said about Johnny's jungle not being in the meta. I think this is like Layer's jungle meta for sure for the Titans, and with the buffs and changes, it's only going to enable him even further.
Ooh, I'm terrified.
Yeah.
Like he's doing this good on like pre-super buff jungle items on Kamazots in jungle. Like now he's gonna put it out there when he gets like 30 or 40 more power in the build. Yeah, I'm kind of terrified what he's gonna do with these upcoming changes.
Definitely. I mean, who decided Jotuns needed 50 power? That just doesn't seem right.
Yeah, every man.
Who thought that?
Hindu
I
man,
don't know.
dude. Hindu
I don't
man
know.
with the script for the Layers World Ring.
It's a wild script, man.
Let's move on to the next set of the week here. The Atlantis Leviathans versus the Valhalla Valkyries. And again, some, close games, especially game one, I think, was fairly close until, an FG fight just, I think Zero overextends a little bit in an FG fight, gets picked, and that sort of quickly leads to the downfall of the Valks in game two. Or in game one, and game two, sort of like the other Valk sets, was a bit of a stomp here from the Leviathans. It was 26-6 in the kills. Panatom kind of going off 10-1 in game two. Again, I think this is sort of an expected thing. So what I wanted to focus on here was Raph picking Warflag. I feel like Raph has been picking Warflag almost exclusively for maybe the past 2 or 3 weeks in the SPL, and we got to talk about it. I know it's getting buffed in the newest patch that came out this week. But is Raph just preparing, so to speak?
I don't know, honestly. Like, he might just be preparing to think that, yeah, this item's going to be good then, but even a lot of other sports are still saying that, like, Sentinels is probably going to be the go-to. Maybe once we see some, like, kind of testing around with Benevolence, maybe we'll see a little bit of flex between that, Warflag, and Sentinels, but I think right now Sentinels, especially like the pre-buff Warflag, I think Sentinels is just like the way to go.
Right.
The only other thing you would ever probably change out is if they're like running a super healer comp, you just go like Tainted Steel right away or something like that. But even then, man, Sentinels is just too good not to have at this point. It could be some practice, but at the rate that the Valkyries games go, they don't get it to the point where he can upgrade that Warflag and really get like the big benefits from it just yet.
A little bit of trolling from Raffer, maybe, also?
I don't think it's trolling necessarily.
So.
I think it's a decent item. It's just like when you're experimenting, like, listen, the Valkyries, they know, like, everybody knows there's always going to be that one team that's going to be the bottom seeded team. Like, historically, there's one, sometimes two teams that either gets 0 wins or like less than 3 throughout each phase. So this is kind of them still kind of experimenting to see if they can find their footing, still find their identity, so to speak. And it kind of gives you like a pseudo talisman of energy stats so for your teammates while you're pushing or defending even. So it's not terrible.
Yeah, I think this is just like, I'm not going to, speak for them and say, none of their options are like, oh, we're guaranteed to lose this one, so let's just have some fun with it kind of thing. I think it's more so like, this is going to be an uphill climb no matter really who we're facing. I mean, even when you take the Scarabs, who they were able to beat in the first half of Phase 2, and then once they had their new roster, kind of all situated, then, it was a pretty big Scarabs win for themselves. I think it's just the Valkyries still just trying things out like, hey, what is working for us? And I think a lot of it has come from the dual lane. When Emilitu is confident in his play, he looks unstoppable. I mean, I think he even got one solo kill on Zap and was able to get a couple of like big kills on him in game number 1. That's an MO that we don't get to see very often. And when he's able to step up like that, it alleviates a lot of that pressure for Johnny, because that's where they've been putting so much of their focus is Johnny. Like, Johnny, get yourself something that you can, get the solo lane to get Ducky ahead, and then come over here and help duo lane, and then come over here and help Zeros, and hopefully throw everything across the map. But when Emil can step up and play his game, it lets Raffer have a little bit of peace of mind. It lets him kind of push up in dual lane. It lets Johnny focus more on the other side of the map and maybe make rotations over if necessary. Like, hey, we want to try and pressure for Gold Fury. Come over here real quick. But I think this Warflag can help with that. The movement speed, attack speed, it's nice when you get the stacks for it. Maybe it is just practice for Raffer, but if that practice is what gets them the advantage in dual lane and really gets them that pressure to allow Emil to play so confidently, keep going with it.
Yeah. Bonnie, your thoughts on this?
All right, I'm gonna sit here and confidently say that Raffer was doing it in preparation of next patch because he has done this so many times.
He has.
I don't recall if it was season 3 or 4, but I remember when Oni's Hunter first got its initial buff or like change or whatever, and it was 9% mitigation for 1900 gold. No one was buying it but him. It was crazy. I remember Raffer loaded up and had Oni's Hunter's Guard. This is like season 3 or 4, and I'm like, this guy is trolling. That item sucks. And I was like a plathead at the time. And lo and behold, everyone started building it. That became the meta.
Yep.
Before the Sunder nerf, Raffer is not building Sunder in the final week leading up to it. And remember the boots removal.
Right.
He rolls up and goes Wingblade Relic Hacker instead of boots. I think this is just something that Raffer does in anticipation of the shifts. He just tries to get, that little extra foothold by playing without it before so that he can get used to it before everyone else. But for the rest of my thoughts on the Valkyries, JMac mentioned it at the start of the show about how sometimes they just forget how to play Smite late game. There was 2 really, really bad fire plays that had me like absolutely just like scratching my head. And one other thing that I really wish they'd stop doing is completely abandoning what works best for them. They still haven't been finding wins, but sometimes they look a lot better than they do in other losses where they get smoked. And if they pull out a draft or a strategy or a comp or whatever that doesn't win, they immediately scrap it and go to the next one. And they have a really, really deep playbook, but nothing has netted them a W yet. But there's games like the first one that I think was very, very winnable for them, even in a controlling position where they had Fire Giant, and then they say, well, we lost, let's scrap that and go to a completely another strategy. I would like them stick to what works and almost wins to see if they can really rinse that for a little bit more and finally find the W they've been searching for.
That's a interesting way to think about it. I think I've noticed that too, especially with the team comps, the picks and bans. It feels like they're always switching it up a little bit too much, But that might just be because they change up the bans and it sort of also inevitably affects the picks. I don't know. It's hard to, I'm sure, find a balance there between picking new things and going with old strategies that are still leading to losses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point that you mentioned, though, because in that earlier set that week of the Warriors against the Bolts in like games 2 and 3, they stuck to those 3 frontliners, right? Like it was the Serb, Kuzenbo, and Erlang Shen for those 3 games 2 and 3. So like they just like slightly tweaking things, and it worked for them between games 2 and 3 of how they altered that game plan, just tweaking the backline instead. So you shouldn't really necessarily scrap the whole, take out the kitchen sink and throw it at them, but a little tweak, like maybe just like fix the plumbing underneath and then turn on the faucet instead of replacing it all.
We didn't talk too much about the Leviathans here, but I imagine all you guys are going to say is, business as usual for these boys here. Right?
Yeah. Wrong you sitting in mid lane stealth for like a minute at a time. Always.
Oh, that
always
was beautiful.
Fun. Dude, I swear, if I see him play it again, I have the opportunity to watch. I'm going to try and like get a stopwatch and count that man's time sitting in mid lane.
I would never get tired of watching.
Because there was a moment where it was a solid, and production pointed out it was a solid minute and 15 seconds he sat in that mid lane stealth. So he got what, like 2 full minion waves during that time. And I don't know if they didn't see him, but they were just like, I haven't seen Wrong You in a while, let's not walk forward. Or if they did see him and they're trolling back, like, yeah, we're not going to walk forward. But the fact that he's able to just do this game after game, and not just like once in a game, like, you fooled me once, we're going to keep you. Like, he does it like 4 or 5 times every single game.
I mean, alarm bells have to be like flashing bright red as soon as you don't see the support for like 30 seconds, especially if it's competitive. Like,
look, if I'm losing a game and I don't see support, I'm not even going to my red buff at this point. I'm just like, where's he at? I don't know. This is a circuit not on the map. I'm terrified.
Sorry to cut you off there, Totally.
Oh, you're good. I was going to say a funny story about in the past, like actually when the circuit was released, like Lassus would play it in the jungle and he would do things like that as well. I think he might have been the first person to do it in an SPL match. Don't quote me on that, but it was definitely in a highlight reel where he would sit there for 30 seconds just waiting, he didn't do it as much as Rongyu did in that specific game, but there were like bits and pieces that I remember specifically during scrims, during matches. And I think in this specific game that Rongyu might have like unleashed a Pandora's box where we're going to see a lot of that kind of plays coming from not just SPL teams, but also just like ranked games and just to get me up.
I think it's funny he was even doing against like Ao Kwong, or not Ao Kwong, Kukulkan, who's a god who can literally sit under tower, so he didn't even have the chance to really utilize it. Like if he can force that on a god like Raijin, yeah, go for it all the time. But I think I remember exactly which player you're talking about. It's like the triple kill that he had like right at a mid camp for Lassus. Like that's a play that's been ingrained in my mind for as long as that god's been out there. But like, man, teams looking forward, like moving forward against this team, like they've got to realize if Rongyu's playing Circuit, your mid laner's not safe. Like you just have to have something there to keep track.
It is also like such a power move, right? Just to sit there and stealth in mid lane.
It really is.
Like, it's like taunting them without even hitting the VET. That's how
and to
I
get
feel
your
about
farm,
it.
and to get your farm from it too. Like he got 2 full waves in a mid camp just by sitting there.
Yeah,
because he was in range of it the entire time. Like it's absurd.
Yeah.
It's going to come to a point where you're going to have to like start warding literally in the middle of the mid lane and then see him do that and like, all right, abort mid, just go elsewhere. Maybe like do a 3-man gank in side lanes instead of farming even middle.
To be honest, with the new bracer, it's like kind of not even that bad to just throw a ward right in the middle of the lane.
Yeah,
right?
you're always in mid as well.
You know, just put the ward in there, get the extra 10% power. So it's not doesn't seem like a bad idea, right?
And there's something to be said about how well Shinto and Panitum sells it. It's like in ranked when you say gank a lane, gank duo, and your ADC jumps in and ults and the other guy just walks away. Like, okay, the jungler's here. Like, Shinto plays back on the wave and like will tuck his tail like he's afraid because no one's with him. And then you push up because he's selling it and then Rongyu's there.
That's just chemistry, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's get on to the last game here of week 1 in phase 3. The Tartarus Titans versus the Solar Scarabs here. I think a bit of a surprising set on the whole. I did not think this would actually go the full 3 games here. And, you know, the Scarabs, I think, really surprised me in how close I think all these games were. Game 1 was really close. A bit of a bad FG pull leads to a Titans FG steal and win. I think, you know, Paul doing Paul things, right? And then we see this crazy strat from the Scarabs, which is Morgan Tsukiyomi, the double Suki ult, which, I don't know, that was crazy. That was a crazy game. I don't know, you guys have to go watch that on Smite Pod. What a crazy Smite game. Scarabs win, it goes back and forth between these first 2 games, and then game 3, Paul does Paul things, you know, defends a Fire Giant, steals it, kills, I think, gets a triple kill, maybe double kill, something like that, and that's the game. I think we have to be proud of the Scarabs here, fighting so well into this team that won playoffs. But man, seems like the Titans can just turn it on when they want to.
Yeah, Titans are just on fire right now. Even against the Scarabs. I mean, we talked a lot about the Titans, so kind of, you know, just kind of re-highlighting with it. I mean, this team is just playing to a level that we didn't really get to see from them almost the entire year. I think this jungle change has been one that's really helped them out. Layers is able to bring that level of aggression that Scary D really didn't have available at that time, because, you know, this is Scary D coming from solo lane, so he's used to being super tanky, being able to jump in the middle of these fights 20 minutes in, not having to try and jump in the middle of fights from that 0 to 20 minute mark, and notably less tanky at that same time. But Layers has been in this meta all the time. He's been in this hard burst assassin meta. He's been in these, you know, tankier jungle metas as well. So Layers has that experience for it. Paul just being Paul, the Smite Paul League, whatever you want to throw with it. But I think a lot should be said here about the Solar Scarabs over everything. It was highlighted by, I want to say Mifflin actually made a note of it, that it was tweeted out by Bobby, that he said that his team is going to be top 5 by the end of this phase. So when you take into account what top 5 means, let's look at what the top 5 was last time around. It was Tartarus Titans at 5th. So there's your Jade Dragons at 4th, Leviathans at 3rd, Bolts at 2nd, and then the Kings at 1st. So to be top 5, you've got to be better than one of those 5 teams. And this is a vastly better Tartarus Titans than we saw in phase number 2. That's a tall order, but this game really showed that they have that potential. Stewart looking really comfortable now after he's had some time through. I mean, one of the one of the hardest parts for Stewart was just like the fact that so many teams focused him. He's like one of the most dying players on his team, just stat wise. He's just had it rough. I mean, nobody's been able to really help Stewart out in the previous phase, but now Inbound is getting him more comfortable, allowing him to safely kind of farm that earlier stage, so that way he can kind of hold his own when it comes to the late game fights. I think Scream's really been helping them out in the jungle. I think these kind of more out there picks have really been doing some wonders, especially now that we're coming to the end of the warrior meta and we're now going to be seeing assassins. The fact that he's bringing out Tsukiyomi and Thor and is looking this good pre-buff of all of their items that will make them so much better and really be able to show just how good those gods are. I think it's a big thing for them. Solar Troll has really honed his front line. He's been, I would even say up into phase 1 and 2, I would say Solar Troll was probably the player you looked at this team almost every single time. Like, you want this team to win, make sure SOT's getting ahead. If he's got that frontliner where he can not only bully his solo lane opposition, but just jump into fights and be undying, it's really worked out for them. But Baronic has really been stepping up in mid lane. He's opened up his god pool. His Giannis play is one that is, I'm not going to say it's the same level of Hurry Win just yet, Hurry Win Prime Giannis, but like, he's really stepping up and making Giannis a ban-worthy god against him because he's had some real success with that god. And I think the games that you do get it are probably some of the most terrifying Scarab games that you'll see. And the fact that he's able to make these adaptations, do this Morgan Suki combo, which it's just raw damage. It's not like you're doing it for this high CC. You're not doing the double Hoonbot Soul, the double Terra for all this protection and healing. You're doing this because you want to kill somebody. And the Scarabs are a team that just wants to scrap. That's why you see inbound play gods like Hercules and Serket and Fenrir. He is a player who wants to get in their face immediately. And I think that's when the Scarabs play best. That first game by them, just a miscommunication of not paying attention to where Paul was at Fire Giant, so he steals it, and then that's the end of that one. But you get to game number 2, much cleaner fight coming from them, able to kind of make these flank maneuvers. I remember Stewart, especially around that Fire Giant, I think it's around like 28 minutes or so. Play started, breaking out right around mid camps, and he kind of just swung to the back line and then just started swinging at the back liner or at the front liners who were dealing with them. And then you get inbound who, look, it was me. I'm not gonna even say memed. It was like very harshly talked about his emoji play for the first 2 phases, like sub 20% win rate. You would have fooled me if you saw the emoji in that last set. I mean, he has really stepped it up on that god specifically, and I think that this is a Scarabs team that can take top 5. It's just going to be a matter of who they're going to take that 5th spot from.
Sure.
Honestly, I'm not too surprised by the results of this set, and I'm a little surprised that it wasn't a win for the Scarabs simply because of the circumstances. It's in studio, and it's a very emotional match for the Scarabs. Layers on the other team, you could tell in that player cams how badly inbound was just like popping off and like invested in this victory. Like when you mentioned the tweet, JMac, I thought you were going to go with the tweet where he talked about like, we're going to win game 2, like we win those 9 out of 10 times or something like that. And they did. And then you look at the post-game player cams, like right as they're winning, you can see inbound pop off. But to the other side, it didn't really face the Titans after losing that game. You can see their player cam, like it was just all business from there. They adapted very well in game number 3. Paul literally willed their team to victory in that game number 1 and really shut down not really shutting down the hell in game number 3, but just heavily out damaging the hell in game number 3. That Raijin is so hard to really focus out Paul. And I think Layers kind of enabling the backline, like we mentioned before in the previous sets, of like this is a huge boost of confidence, I think, for the Titans, especially considering that they only had 1 scrim during the break.
Bonnie?
Yeah, this set I had a lot of takeaways from this set. The first one is that I think the Scarab should have won. Based on how they played game 1, and as Toli mentioned, Paul just kind of decided I don't want to win or lose. And sometimes when great players do that, there's not much you can do but sit back and just watch them do their thing. And that's pretty much what Paul did. This set also really gave us a taste of what it's like when LAN is back. Because yeah, we've had a couple of games in studio, but I think this was the first one with like tangible emotion. There was kind of the irony of layers. When the Scarabs were supposed to have their first game in studio, Sot wasn't able to be there, and now Sot and the Scarabs' first game in studio is against layers, playing his with the Titans. And that was really intense. You can see how much all of these teams wanted to win it, and the Scarabs continue to they have no business like doing this to the Titans when you look at like how they've been playing recently, both of these teams, and the Scarabs will always be so close. I hate to say it because this seems a bit gosh, the word eludes me right now, but it reminds me of, for any football fans out there, they say the Dallas Cowboys, they're just good enough to let you down. They get so close and you see the potential for them to be great, and then just right ahead of the finish line they fall a step too short. But I definitely do think that this was a step in the right direction. I think you're now seeing the mentality shift away from this team now, and you can see it in Bobby's tweets. It's no longer, we're just coming here to show up and play, and we're going to do our best to win. It's we understand and identify our mistakes. We should win, and we are going to win. And I think that's a really big step that they've took mentally. They pulled themselves out of the dumps. Yeah, there was a whole lot of controversy surrounding the roster moves. They've moved past that, and now they're looking to the future of how to be the best Smite team they can be. And I think the future looks really well for them. And I also want to give props to Baronic, who has actually quietly had one of the biggest god pools of mid this season. He's played Scylla, he's played the Babas, Raz, Morgans, Tiamat, Raijin, Giannis. Hell, he's put out every single thing under the sun. Whereas a lot of teams have identified the way they want to play, and they have one or two mids that they'll pick with it. Like Paul played Tia 3 games in the first set, and Raijin 3 games in this one. Baronic is switching up gods and playstyles every single time, and I think performing relatively well on it as well, considering the circumstances.
Yeah, definitely. I was totally surprised by the performance he put on the Morgan. I don't think I've seen. I don't know. I'm sure you might have played it, Morgan, in the past. I don't think we've seen such a good sort of performance from Baronic as we had seen in Game 2. So that is definitely a good thing, pointing to a brighter future for this Scarabs team as well. Any final thoughts from you guys on this set? We had a lot of good points made from all of you here. So
I'm just mostly looking forward to see what the Scarabs are going to do in their next set. Honestly, like if they're able to do this against phase 2 champions Titans, and they're able to put out this level of play with that level of confidence. I think that they can put top 5, and again, I think it's just going to come down to which top 5 team do they take out is going to be the question. Because they've got the ability to do so, they've got the drive, they got the confidence to do so. Now, I think that was one of their kind of downsides in phase 2 was they were lacking a little bit of that confidence. But with Inbound stepping up really big as their team, as kind of their team captain, and saying, "Guys, we can do this, and we're not only can we do it, we're going to do it." I think that little bit is really all that it takes for them. And I think for me, that's just my biggest takeaway from this set is it's just how much better the Scarabs going to look this season. Because they finished, 2 or 3 wins set-wise last phase. That's easily, I think, going to double by the end of this.
Some predictions here from JMac, huh?
That's my prediction. It's at least going to double from them, I would say.
I have to agree with that also. I think during the draft of whichever top 2 teams are going to be picking who's going to be in their group, obviously Valix is going to be first picked. But the next pick is definitely not going to be the Scarabs. And it might not even be the pick after that if they keep it up like this.
No, this is looking like one of those pick your poison kind of ones. Like, do you want this? Do you want to go against the Scarabs, or do you want to go against X here? Because this is not a team that you just throw at the bottom of it and say, all right, cool, now we have our win. Because, I mean, they did that to the Titans, and they were the phase 2 champs.
Yeah, it sort of burned, the last time we had a group stage, I think it burned the Kings a little bit, right? When they, I mean, obviously they didn't have sort of their pick of the litter, I guess, right? Because they were second seed. But the Scarabs, I guess a bit of a different roster back then in phase one, but still the Scarabs were able to, make the best of their situation and make it to the phase one playoffs. So things looking bright for them. Yeah.
The Scarabs were called the Dragon Slayers for a reason
That's
for a
true.
while.
That's
Like
true.
this is a team that I would say maybe with an arguably weaker roster were able to beat the Dragons. Now they've gotten, I would say, probably, losing Layers definitely hurts, but being able to replace him with Scream, who's also another season, SPL level talent. And even, you lose Zapman, that kind of hurts. That's probably the biggest hurt from them is losing Zapman and bringing Stewart up. Stewart, who looked really good in the SEC, struggled in the SPL the last time he came up. Now back in SEC, got some more time to practice, coming back and getting some confident play in phase 3. I think this is a stronger team as a whole this phase around, and maybe they can live back up to their Dragon Slayer name.
Yeah, maybe. This week, I was able to interview the solo laner for the Tartarus Titans, Benji, to talk about phase 1 and phase 2 and his long Smite career as well. Take a look. Hey guys, I'm here with Benji, the solo laner for the Tartarus Titans, to talk a little bit about phase 1, their exciting phase 2 playoff win, look forward to phase 3 a little bit, and then sort of reflect on his career as a whole as well. So we got to start with phase 1. A bit of a sort of interesting roster with Scary D playing in the jungle. What was your sort of take on the whole Scary in the jungle thing? I mean, was it something that you thought was gonna work, or was there some, I don't know, hesitation maybe?
Yeah, well, at the beginning of the year, like when we decided to do it, we were all pretty confident that it would work. But we did have in mind that jungle is probably like the hardest role to learn, and it would definitely take some time. Um, but I think with Scary, we just weren't seeing like the progress that needed to happen
Yeah,
in order for it to be working like by the end of the year.
sure,
And
sure.
also just as a team, like we weren't really getting better either.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously I'm sure that contributed a bit to the shaky start that you guys had. I think a lot of people sort of expected you'd see a lot of these like world championship players, people, or at
Yeah.
least people who've won the world championship on a team, and there are sort of some expectations there. Does that play into it, or were you sort of expecting, maybe to lay low and figure things out for a while, and you weren't like too worried about starting off sort of shaky like that?
Yeah, I personally I wasn't too worried about starting off like kind of shaky. Because we have the people on this team who've won basically all of the past world championships going back to like, season 4.
Yeah,
So that definitely is the expectation for us to win worlds. But I definitely wouldn't have minded if we had been like, kind of bad for a phase or two.
sure.
But it wasn't really the results. It was more just like kind of the lack of progress we were seeing, which
Mhm.
is why we felt like, we needed to make a change. And, clearly the change worked out pretty well for us
Yeah.
since, you know, we haven't lost with layers yet.
That is true. That is true. I did have sort of Cherry, your old coach, on
Yeah.
my show last week, and we were talking about Layers joining the team, and he sort of seemed to think that it was kind of inevitable that Scary D would probably get replaced just because the sort of experience that Layers or someone who is more familiar with the jungle has makes it just an easier to play the game for everybody.
Yeah.
Is that I know that I'm a big Scary fan. I'm not trying to shit on Scary or anything like that. But was that something that was becoming apparent to you guys at some point in phase 1 or phase 2, or were you more optimistic than that?
Kind of, yeah. Like I'm also a big Scary fan, and I wasn't even like really like that disappointed with Scary's like individual performance. Like one of the main factors was we just needed a bit more experience and a bit more leadership. Um since we didn't really have that much direction as a team.
Mhm.
And I think even though Layers isn't like that much of a leader, just like his experience in the jungle just helps a lot with that.
Yeah,
Because it just gives us a lot more confidence on the map.
sure, sure. So now you guys sort of make this change. Well, I guess it takes some time, even into phase 2. You guys are playing with Scary for a while. I think it was basically around the end of phase 2 where you decide to shift things up, which seems to be basically, I think you're running out of time to make a
Yeah.
change. Was that sort of how you guys were feeling about it as well?
Yeah, basically. We were kind of just thinking like if we want a shot at, doing anything this phase, we'll probably need to make a change. But that wasn't really the main um like factor behind it. We kind of just felt like we weren't improving as a team and like something had to change
Hmm.
because it was getting to the point where people were just like losing confidence in like the team as a whole.
Right,
And
right.
yeah, once you get to that point, you kind of just have to change something. Like you kind of just need like a mental reset.
Hmm.
Even if it's not, like, really anyone's, like, fault individually,
Sure.
you kind of just have to, switch it up.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to sort of pivot to winning playoffs. I think, I certainly didn't expect you guys to, uh, you know, play the way you guys played. It was, I think, a pretty, how do I say this? Like, dominant sort of win from you guys. I don't think any set went to even 5 games, right? So,
Yeah, yeah,
that's pretty uncommon. I think we've sort of seen a lot of times in the playoffs and worlds that a lot of these sets actually do end up going 5. So pretty crazy that you guys have sort of this dominant run here. Is
yeah.
this sort of just all the pieces sort of clicking into place a little bit, or were you guys maybe a little surprised by it as well?
I wasn't too surprised because we were kind of, like, dominating scrims with layers, like, literally from the first day we got him, we were just beating everyone in scrims,
Hmm.
like, pretty consistently, and
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bit of a joke that, like, winning scrims before a tournament is, like, kind of a curse
Right.
'cause, a lot of times teams will go in with, like, 80% scrim win rates, and then they'll just get first rounded,
Sure. Sure.
because maybe they're, like, overconfident or it's sometimes hard to get, like, a good read on the meta when you're just winning every single game. 'Cause you can't really tell, like, what works and you're not getting punished for doing, like, bad shit.
Yeah.
So but yeah, I wasn't too surprised. We kind of 3-1'd everyone and we could've I think if this team had, like, a bit more experience playing together and we had been more consistent, we could have been even more dominant than that.
Sure.
'Cause
Sure.
I think our losses were more on us than, the other team outplaying us.
Yeah. I think definitely. I think in like the king set for sure, it definitely felt like there was some that you guys definitely had that that all wrapped up. Uh,
Yeah.
does it feel maybe to you that Layers has a bit of sort of a chip on his shoulder, especially after the whole uh, Solar Scarabs roster shakeup that sort of led to this whole like ripple effect? I guess like this midseason roster apocalypse we can call it.
Mhm.
Does it feel like Layers is like, I don't know, playing just a little bit I don't know, it's a little more oomph, you know?
Um, Maybe. I think especially, like, when he was kind of, like, trying out for us, because originally we were planning to get Sino,
Hmm.
and we were kind of just like, "Oh, we're playing the Scarabs next week." It would be funny if we got Layers, because like, he'd really wanna beat them, right?
Sure.
So it wasn't even like and then we played with Layers, and it just worked really well.
Hmm.
So it went from almost being like it's kind of like a happy accident that we got him on the team almost. But
Hmm.
yeah, I definitely say, like I mean, I can't speak to his mentality about it,
Sure.
and he hasn't really talked about it that much, but if I was him, I would definitely, feel like I had something to prove.
Sure. Sure. So now that you guys have won the playoffs and things like that, does that sort of ramp up the expectations now for phase three? We've sort of seen that you guys can really sort of fight into and beat a lot of these top teams now, doing it especially sort of in crunch time with the playoff win. Is it now sort of you guys are here to fight for, a top four, top two position in phase three?
I think so, but to be honest, on like most iterations of like this team, like between like now and last year's Radiance, like we never really had like the best, regular season
Mm-hmm.
performances, but with playoffs we always popped off.
It's true.
So I'm not really too sure what to expect for our for our phase three, but I'm always confident in us when it matters.
Yeah,
So
this is
yeah,
some classic under promise over deliver here from Benji here.
yeah.
I've heard a lot from players on the Dragons, especially that they're really concerned about not um, sort of like losing their edge and like getting hot at the right time. Is that
Mhm,
something that you look for, especially now that this is the phase that matters the most? Essentially, world seeding is on the line now, and is
mhm.
that something that you guys are as a team maybe thinking about in terms of putting like grinding a little bit more in terms of practice, or is that something that is happening in your team environment?
Not too much. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think we're too like dependent on like having like a meta or whatever because
Mm-hmm.
everyone on our team is just so flexible. Like there have been so many times where it's like I'm kind of running the solo meta and Paul's kind of running like the mid meta.
True. Yeah.
Um, and at phase two playoffs, like we basically played every single top meta pick, and basically every single other team had like a
Mm-hmm.
few picks, they didn't play, which kind of just ended up with us, winning every single draft basically. Like if you look at the drafts on paper, we were just getting better drafts than like everyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think we're just like really flexible as players. So I've never really been too worried about, us kind of having a meta that doesn't fit us or, being in like a situation where we're kind of like losing our edge.
Yeah.
And as I was saying like previously, like we always pop off when it matters. So
Sure.
yeah,
Sure.
I'm really not worried about that at all.
Yeah, now that you mentioned the drafting, I think we see a lot of times teams maybe don't rely, but are like the coach is heavily involved in the drafting, and your team
Mhm.
doesn't really have a coach. How does drafting work for you guys? Is there obviously I imagine you guys have meetings and things about certain
Mhm.
strats and picks that you want, but is that just it? It's just sort of like group decisions, and you guys figure it out before each set, or is
Yeah.
there something more to that?
Yeah, I think this is a bit of a hot take, but I think that coaches in Smite are really overrated,
Mm,
and their importance kind of gets overplayed by casters who don't actually know what they do. But yeah, we do fine without a coach. We just talk it over ourselves. We all know like our roles really well. We
mm,
all have like a pretty good read on the meta. Um, I've been on like quite a few teams where there's like a few people who kind of just like they kinda show up and, like, play their role, but they don't
mm,
really know what's going on. We don't
sure.
really have anyone like that too much. I feel like pretty much everyone has a good understanding of the game, so it makes, drafting and stuff like that really easy, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it must also help that like a lot of the players here, especially like you, Aurora, and Cyclone, have basically been in the league since what season 2, right? So
Yeah,
that's like
yeah, we
six,
have so
7
much
years of
experience, yeah.
of playing this game. That's basically invaluable experience, I think.
Yeah.
Speaking of sort of your career, it's a good segue into the next sort of section of the interview here. It's been a
Mhm.
while since you've had a chance, I think, to really compete at Worlds. I mean, I think you guys got to the semifinals last year and things like that, but compete as in like for a world championship, being
Mhm.
that the time you won was in season 4. Has that maybe changed your perspective on Smite a little bit? Showing how hard it is to get sort of to the promised land.
Yeah, yeah, it's just been kind of difficult because, pretty much every year going into Worlds, except for maybe, like, season 6, I was, like, really confident that my
Mm-hmm.
team could win. Things just didn't, like, pan out that well. But yeah, I'm definitely always just really confident in myself. So, and especially this year, like we have Paul, like he basically has been carrying worlds for years.
Sure,
So
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like
I think
between
I think on yeah I think on this team we just have like some of like the hardest like land carry players ever, all on one team. So yeah, really confident for worlds, but you never know.
yeah, it's between Paul and Neil for main character status, right? So
Yeah.
speaking on your perspective, I think you are one of the few players that has been playing, since their high school days. I think it's like you and Scream, and a lot of people tend to pick up Smite. I know Steve's stories; he picked up Smite in college and things like that. Though, so there are
Mhm.
a couple sort of like older heads here. What was that experience like? Playing Smite sort of as a younger person in this league, and now you've sort of transitioned into someone who living on their own is definitely, I think, a more mature person than
Mhm.
when you first started, right? Probably like 7 years
Yeah.
ago, right? That's a lot of growing for anybody. Can you talk about your experience being a young person and then sort of now you're a veteran?
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely all of my favorite, like, memories from Smite were from, like, season 2. Like, the first, like, LAN I went to, and then going to that first Worlds at the Cobb Energy Center, that was, like, so cool, to be honest.
Hmm.
Um, and since then, I feel like nothing I mean, aside from winning Worlds in season 4, I feel like since then, nothing has really, like, lived up to that much, to be honest. Like, I mean, obviously for the last year and a half because of COVID, it's been all
Sure.
online, which
Yeah.
is pretty boring in comparison, but even, like, the Worlds at DreamHack just I don't know, they weren't, like, that hype to me. But yeah, the early days of Smite were definitely my favorite.
Sure, sure. You know, another thing is like throughout your career, you've been on quite a few what we would consider super teams. I'm thinking sort of especially this year and last year, and
Yeah.
I think your United squad. Did you guys stay together after season 4 for the most part, or did you split up?
Yeah, after season 4 we stayed together, and then before fall of that year we replaced Ven with Baskin.
Right,
But
right.
aside from that, it was
Yeah,
same gang.
so I mean, I think that would probably be considered a bit of a super team too, right? Like, you know,
Yeah.
returning champs, right? So does that do you feel any extra pressure from those sorts of like monikers that maybe casters or the public gives you guys, or is that something that you don't even think about too much?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think about it too much, but yeah, the super team concept is kind of weird because it's just judging people based on like their past success. I definitely wouldn't say that like most of my teams have been super teams.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
All right. I've been asking this question of almost every player I've had on the SPL rundown here, and so only fitting
Mhm.
that I ask you as well. You know, you've had a long career here. Have there been any players or, you know, other people that have been sort of mentors in your long career? And the sort of the flip side of that coin, have you had any maybe rivals that have been with you throughout your SPL career as well?
Yeah, I definitely haven't really had any mentors. I mean, this sounds like, pretty ego, but ever since I got into the SPL, I thought I was as good as anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never really looked up to anyone that much.
Sure,
And
sure.
then in terms of rivals, I'd say like I don't know, I'd say like probably the only like rival narrative I've had would be like me and Deathwalker in like
Yeah,
season 4 and season 5 because we
sure.
played each other a lot.
Yeah.
And I was basically the best solo in North America. He was the best in Europe. So that was kind of a cool rivalry. And I'd say like to this day, Deathwalker is probably been the most difficult person I've had to play against in like my Smite career. So yeah, definitely him.
All right, Benji, I'm all out of questions here. So now,
Uh-huh.
now we're gonna talk about, who's entered in your scrims, who you gonna call out here in the league. And of course, if you have anyone you want to shout out, feel free to shout them out. And if you have any thoughts about Smite or anything related to the SPL, I want to give you the player, soapbox here to
Mhm.
sort of say your mind. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to say, to be honest. Follow me on Twitter. I don't stream, and I don't really tweet that much either. But at Benji Smite, if you want to boost the numbers a little bit. Yeah, that's really all I got.
All right. Well, I'll try it out. Shop.smiteproleague.com. Go pick up
Uh-huh.
some merch, support our favorite players and the Smite Pro League as well. I want to thank you so much, Benji, for coming on and wish you the best of luck in Phase 3 and, of course, Worlds coming up at the
Uh-huh.
end of the year here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. All right. It's that time of the week again for us to make our picks for Phase 3, Week 2. Let's start with the Camelot Kings versus the Solar Scarabs, who we were just talking about. Totally, you want to start us off here for week 2?
Kings versus Scarab. So Kings didn't look too clean against Leviathans, but that's also against the Leviathans. It's going to come down to, I think, picks and bans in this set more than the execution. I kind of want to give it to the Kings, but after seeing how the Leviathans played it in that last set, I don't know if that was like an emotional kind of game for them. Like they're in the studio, they're against layers, they're old jungler, like we got to play up to our game, or if that's like the new Scarabs that we're going to see in the future. So I'm going to give it to the safe answer for this set and still go with the Kings 2-1.
JMac, how about you? Who you got in this one? Kings versus Scarabs.
I'm going to go with the Scarabs on this one. I think the Kings in their last set, yes, it was against the Leviathans, but I think Vonnie made a really good point is they're kind of playing against themselves a lot more, especially in games in sets that they lose is a lot of kind of confidence downing, especially like if you lose game number 1, like them losing game number 1 in a set is I'm not going to say it's like they're lost all the way through, but it's definitely a hit to them. And their game 2s usually don't look as strong. I think the Scarabs who have had, it's a weird way to put it, who have had a habit of losing most of their sets, they know how to deal with that kind of mental fortitude. Sure, we lose game 1. You saw it in the last set of Titans. Okay, we lost game 1. We should have won that game. That was just a misstep by us. I think the Scarabs are on the rise, and maybe the Kings might be on a little bit of a downward slope. I'm going to give this one to Scarabs, and I'm gonna go super spicy. I'm gonna say this can be 2-0 Scarabs.
Ooh, 2-0 Scarabs from JMac here. Vonnie, who you got?
I'm also gonna give it to the Scarabs, but not spicy enough to go 2-0. I'll say 2-1 Scarabs. So I definitely think the Kings are good enough to take one out.
All right, JMac, start us up here for the next game of week 2. The Olympus Bolts versus the Jade Dragons. This is going to be a good set, I think.
This is hard, man. There's no way this set ends in 2. And against like top 4 level teams, like it's always one of those, like there's no way this only goes 2, but then we sometimes only see them go 2. And it's just like, how in the world? God, man, this is hard. I think with the changes to the jungle, this buffs both of the junglers. I think maybe Sam slightly more because I think this might attune to his god pool a little bit more. I think that'll also allow Hurrywin to do a lot of kind of crazy things from mid lane. But the Hurry versus Venenu matchup, oh man, this is tough. Maybe. I don't know, man. This might be the hardest one for me to make a prediction for this entire time, but I think I'm gonna give this one 2-1 to the Bolts.
Oh, 2-1 to the Bolts.
I'm gonna go 2-1 Bolts here. Or I think even with them kind of looking maybe not as hot as when they were on their 8-0 streak, I think the Dragons sometimes can suffer with kind of messing around a little bit in their matchups, even in these kind of top ones. Their picks and bans on both ends are fairly strong, but I think the Bolts' level of flexibility in their draft and their comfort level with that flex is super important with it. Like being able to just confidently pick a Circuit first pick is something that I don't think that the Dragons would have with something like that. I don't know. I'm going to go 2-1 Bolts here.
Sure. Vonnie, who you got in this one?
I actually don't think this set will be close at all. I think this is kind of going to be like the anime part, right, where you have two strong. This is going to be a show of strength. This is going to be where you have like two strong characters fights, and then one of them just absolutely destroys the other. I think
someone's going Super Saiyan. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that Sam on this patch with all the maces being buffed, and this is assuming that the meta kind of returns back to traditional jungle style of play that I do think will favor some junglers better across the league, like Layer Sam. I think if it falls back to what I anticipated it to be, and traditional junglers, full damage assassins, I think Sam is just going to run rampant. And I think the Dragons will return to form and be the dominating force that everyone kind of got used to them being for so long. Because I think this meta of tanky junglers where you have to play utility really hurts Sam and them a lot as a result. But again, assuming that Sam's allowed to play a traditional style of assassin, I think the Dragons roll up and absolutely smoke the Bolts. 2-0.
2-0 Dragons from Vonnie. Billy, you're going to have to be the decider here. Who you got in this one?
So I think historically in the past couple of seasons, at least during regular play, not during Worlds, but like PBM and the boys really ramp up when it comes close to crunch time, especially Worlds. So I think like they're not going to win out every single set, I think, but they're going to come very close. And I think with how sketchy the Bolts kind of looked against Oni Warriors in the past couple of weeks in the playoffs and whatnot before that, I'm going to have to give it to the Dragons 2-0 as well. Not going to give it a single game.
All right, Bonnie, start us off here for the Oni Warriors versus the Solar Scarabs. Who you got?
I think this will be another banger of a set, but I think 2-1 for the Warriors. I'm going to give it 2.
And I think Neil is going to be in Atlanta or in Alpharetta at least for this set. Right, I believe he is traveling this week. So that's another thing to take into account here. Toli, how do you feel about this one? Oni Warriors versus Solar Scarabs.
Are they in studio without Dardas in this set?
I don't think they're going into studio unless the whole team is there.
Yeah, I think it's only if all 5 are there. The complications outside of it are just a little weird.
Yeah.
So I think it's only if the full team is there for it. So
then what was the story then with Barra that one game or the one set?
That was a really, really awkward one to pull off because That was one where they had to do some like nonsense. That's why some of the games also took so long to get in, is because there were a lot of crazy like additional things they had to do, and even then there were lots of complications with it. So I think that experiment was kind of a probably just stick to only the LAN. I think that was kind of a test one for it. And now seeing the complications that came with having some players here, some players not, having to do player cams with the studio, and then on the other one having to have the delays between it all, and then just trying to get people in all the clients properly for it made it a little awkward to do so.
Gotcha.
Well, I was just saying that,
I don't know. I kind of want to.
That's all I'm trying to mention here is by him moving, from West Coast Canada to, 30 feet from the server, basically, right? So sorry to cut you off there, totally.
Oh, you're good. Ping is definitely going to be better for sure, but depending on the setup as well, how comfortable is he going to be playing on that setup? I kind of want to give it to the Solar Scarabs because the Oni Warriors kind of shot themselves in the foot, I think, in some of the previous sets. And with the Scarabs playing the way that they did against the Titans, I think that they could beat a lesser team like the Oni Warriors at the very least. So I'm going to give it to the Scarabs 2-1.
JMac, finish us off for this set here. The Oni Warriors versus the Solar Scarabs. Who you got?
So I think the Warriors looked really good against the Bolts because the Bolts refused to adapt to the play style necessarily that the Warriors were drafting, which was that solid triple front line, and they kind of made the backliners change their play style up. I don't think the Scarabs are going to be a team that's going to let that one fly. You saw with the Titans versus the Warriors, the Titans did not let that triple front line fly. And I think the Scarabs are going to do the same thing. I'm going to throw a 2-1 or a 2-0 for the Scarabs here.
A lot of Scarabs love here. Okay. Let's get back to the start of the line here. Toli, who you got between the Dragons and the Leviathans? Another banger of a set.
Hey, Pam, how long have you known me for that I can never, ever go against Zapman, right? Like, there's no world that I'm going to vote against Zapman. The question is it going to be 2-0 or 2-1? And I think historically, this every single phase, like Zap has beaten the J Dragons, if I'm not mistaken, even when he was with the Scarabs 3 times, maybe 4 even. So I don't think anything's going to change in this one. I think both junglers are going to benefit from the jungle changes. Question is, who's going to be getting off to that hotter start early on? And I think Leviathans has the momentum. I'm going to give it to them 2-0.
All right. JMac, you feeling the Leviathans love here, or more on the Dragon side?
It's kind of funny that I may have put myself in an awkward spot by thinking, the Bolts were going to beat the Dragons, in the 2-1, and then coming out now and saying that Leviathans are going to win, considering the Leviathans beat the Bolts prior. So I'm kind of putting that tree of like Leviathans over Bolts over Dragons kind of thing here. But I think Tully brings up a good point where like Zapman has been like one of the key figures in fighting against the Dragons every single time and has had strong performance against them. I think I'm going to give it to the Leviathans here. And I think I'm going to take a page out of Vonnie's book and say that this is just going to be Leviathans just show up. And I think this might be a 2-0 for Leviathans.
Okay. Vonnie, how about you? How do you feel about this one?
Yeah, I'm going to follow in the footsteps to JMac. As good as I think the Dragons will be, and I do think Leviathans will take this 2-0. And I don't think that this will be a clear indication of like a disparity between the two teams. I just think Zapman, like Totally said, man, like Zap just doesn't lose to Mike. It just doesn't happen.
Bro, he's in their head.
Yeah, as sure as the sun is going to rise tomorrow, Zap will always beat them. And I wouldn't, if this is ever a matchup, I would never be on the side that is against Zap. Zap, the Atlanta Zap Leviathans are going to 2-0 the J-Trap.
All right, pretty convincing from everyone here, thinking the Leviathans are going to win. JMac, let's start with you on this next set here, the Olympus Bolts versus the Valhalla Valkyries.
I'll probably just keep this one short and sweet. I think this is just going to be a Bolts 2-0. Valkyries, they might put up a decent fight like they did against their last couple of sets, but I would be hard pressed to think that the Bolts will drop a game to the Valkyries, let alone a set. I think this is just gonna be 2-0 Bolts.
Sure. Vonnie, feeling the same there?
Yep, just business as usual for the Bolts. Quick, clean 2-0.
Yeah. Tolly?
This is a game where it's not if the Bolts are going to 2-0 but how badly do they 2-0 the Valks?
Yeah.
Right? It's gonna be one of those indications of like how well are they going to be prepared to try to get that first seed, right? If they lose or falter, let's say even like if they win 2-0, but they kind of falter against the Valks, that might like kind of hinder them, not necessarily like stunt them in their future matchups. Maybe they need to kind of prepare against the Valks a little bit more than maybe how they're preparing for the meta.
Mhm.
So they're definitely going to have to still do their homework. But like if I'm against the Valks, I don't know what they're going to do, honestly, in general, with how they've been picking their banning. So there could be a little bit of a wild card, but no, still built to at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think the last 2 Valk sets, I'm looking up the times for it. It was 57 minutes for Leviathans to win and 50 minutes for the Dragons to win. So maybe an over under on like 52 or 53 maybe.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go totally here. I think this is just a case of how fast do they kind of get this win. And Bolts usually aren't a team that kind of play around much. They're especially even against these lower teams. They just get in there and they get their job done.
Right.
Yep.
All right, Bonnie. Last set of the week here. Camelot Kings versus the Tartarus Titans. Who you got?
I think the Kings are going to show up against the Titans, and I do think the Titans will still take it 2-1.
Mhm.
But I think that the Kings are going to fight tooth and nail in every single one of these games for this. So
Sure.
I think 2-1 for the Titans, but I think this is going to be a really close set.
Totally. How about you? Who you got in this one? Kings versus Titans.
I kind of agree with exactly what Vaughn said in the sense that like Kings ramp up a little bit. Like once they kind of like make a couple of mistakes, their coach Biggie like really rallies the troops, and especially now with this new meta, they're gonna really, I think, like put their foot down, pedal to the metal. And I thought that these 2 teams were going to be the teams that we saw like the World's Finals, obviously with Leviathans and Zap, and I don't know, but I still think that either of these teams could beat the other on any given Sunday. Speaking of Sunday, it's literally the last set. But yeah, I think safe call would be Titans 2-1, but Kings are going to show up.
Sure. JMac, who you got in this one?
I'm going to throw this to be Titans here. I still think that they're showing that they're a more holistically synergistic team compared to the Kings' current state. Because the Kings looked really strong in phase 2, especially at the latter half of it. They stopped. It was like once they beat the Bolts and stopped the win streak, like it felt like it was all uphill for the Kings. And then we get to playoffs, and the Kings just felt like they kind of didn't get the memo that it was playoffs, and we didn't really see much out of them except for the game 3 that they won. I think that the Kings are going to be doing taking a lot of notes, doing a lot of homework based off of that set, based off how the meta is about to change. I would probably say arguably more in Layer's favor than Captain Twig.
Right.
Captain Twig does, he does have a very wide god pool to jungle. He's also got a very interesting god pool compared to some other junglers. Like Najah was like one of his big things right at the start of the season. And we could see a lot of that classic Kings gameplay come back from phase 1 here in phase 3. But I'm going to throw some spice and say this is 2-0 Titans, but this is not a short set by any means. I'm thinking we're going 35, 40 plus minutes each of these games.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember over the picks here. Did we say that the Dragons are going to lose both their games this week and the Kings are going to lose both their games this week? It looks like maybe going for that 5th place for the Scarabs might not be that hard. There's some teams that are taking some losses based on your guys' predictions here.
No, for me, Dragons Boats 2-0 Dragons.
Okay.
Well, I think I'm the only one who voted against Dragons entirely on this.
So some interesting sets coming up here in the SPL. So I know we've sort of been talking about the patch and how you guys think it's going to affect junglers. You think there are any other things that are going to happen as a result of this patch, or are there any gods that you are expecting to see maybe rise up in popularity because of changes that have happened with this new patch?
Couple. I think Horus, you'll see a little bit more play. I do think Guardians for the large part will actually remain changed in the solo lane. I still think you'll see a decent bit of Guardians, and with that leaves room open for a physical support. Horus receiving the buffs he's gotten, I actually think would be a pretty big point to push him forward. And Bacchus as well. I think Bacchus has been in an unfair state for a long time. Maybe I'm just bad at Smite. But I'd love to see some people pull him out. And with Horus and Bacchus getting picked in knockups, I think Mace is getting buffed as well as a Wheelix buff. So we may see a little bit more of her. But I personally think a Wheelix is a bad god and always will be. A friend of mine always says there's this eventuality clause where if she's in your game and on your team, you're eventually going to lose. And besides those, as far as gods goes, I do think that support relic itemization will actually be really, really interesting. We got a pretty big overhaul for a decent bit of them, in terms of cooldowns as well as like just effect numbers being changed around. I think we saw Med picked up a couple of times last split actually, which is pretty surprising. But I think that'll see a decent bit of pickup. Shell as well. Got a nice little buff, horrific cooldown reduction as well as sprint. I think every relic right now is in a really, really good spot, and every single one has viability depending on the situation. So I think that'll actually be pretty exciting going forward to see how people are itemizing relics.
Yeah, I think like support god pool might not change very much. We might see maybe a little bit more Bacchus possibly pop in, maybe a little less Umoja, but considering she already had her nerf and there's no other further changes from there, probably we'll still see just as much her. We might see some Geb. I know that Geb got a very interesting change to his ultimate where it deals base damage and then percent damage. I don't remember actually the order in which those apply. I don't remember if it's the base
think
hit
it's
first
percent
and then
first.
the percent. Yeah, it'd make more sense for the percent to hit first and then the base.
Yeah, it works the same way, I think, like the way pen works, right? Percent first and then flat.
Right, I believe so. And even in the PTS, like post PTS, he had a nerf to that ultimate because it was already doing a ton. It had like a 90 base power reduction at the top end of it. So yeah, I think that's going to be. I think Geb is a god that we might see pop up. Maybe not every game for sure, but I think maybe some of the more tried and true players might pick him up. You might see like PBM or Aurora grab this god, maybe even just to try it out one game if there's like because he works kind of like a Kepri. It's a god you want to keep in the backline. You want to save that one carry with that shield. But then he has the massive impact of having a giant AoE ultimate that also deals a ton of damage. So it's like you blink initiate, you get the big stun, and then you go back to being kind of a backliner in a sense. And it's what kind of puts him in a weird spot because like a lot of the supports now are more like you keep them in the backline like a Kepri, you keep them in the back, protect the backliners the majority, most of if not all of the fight, or you have them just W keying their face the entire time. And you just leave your backliners there on devices. So I think Geb always kind of is in that awkward spot because you want him to be able to do both with the shield and with the ultimate. I think Vonnie bringing up Horus is going to be a big thing. We're already starting to see Horus, I think, between Wrong You and Inbound. Like, those are the two players that love that god. So I think we will see more, especially with Protector Surge getting 20 base healing right off level 1.
Oh, man.
Increase.
Okay.
It goes from, because it was 50 to 250, and now it's going 70 to 250. So he's getting not much on the later ends of it, but having that level as a first ability, having 20 extra base heal is big. And that's just the base because he also has percent that he gets off that, I think, off his scaling.
Right.
I think we'll see more Ho Yi as well, potentially. We've already seen him a couple times, Zap and Panda Cat. Maybe a few more players bring him out after changes to the mark of the Golden Crow. Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of change ups as far as gods go, and it won't be like in a big sweeping storm like this god is just coming back. I think it's going to like trickle in more than anything. Sam for Soccer was already playing a Wheelish before, and now that a Wheelish is getting a really I'm going to put it right out there, a really absurd damage buff on Moonlight Charge, getting 40 extra base power at max rank. Like that is absurd to have. And the fact that he was already kind of playing that god, we might see that come out a little bit more. I think it's more than anything, it's just going to be diversity in the support relics, and then what assassins do we get to see come out? Because I mean, how many assassin items got buffed this patch? Like 6, 7 of them at this point.
Right.
It's going to be ridiculous.
So, any thoughts from you here on what this new patch is going to do to sort of the state of competitive?
I definitely agree with a lot of the things that were mentioned here. Nothing that was mentioned was about the 5-second spawn timers being reduced as well.
Yeah,
Right,
that.
yeah.
So that actually kind of helps Guardians in the solo lane in the sense that they don't have to pick up Hog now. So that actually kind of buffs them in a weird way. Even though with all the nerfs of Vampiric Shroud protection going down, some of the helmets going down as well, I think that 5 seconds is a huge window where you don't necessarily have to buy Hog. You have time to apply a little bit more basic attacks to still get in lane without missing that one very important minion for hitting level 3 on that second wave. And that might open up some more picks potentially. I think we will see Chalk almost immediately. Like that's the one thing that I will say, like going from 13 seconds now to 9 seconds at max rank is huge. A little bit of attack speed scaling as well. I think you could actually build him a little bit more damage oriented in the solo lane if you so choose and feel bold enough to do against some of these Guardians, like with the Transcendence buffs and whatnot. So he does a lot of damage, probably one of the higher ends in the Warrior class, especially with these cooldown nerfs. His ulti is just absurd, like that huge AoE silence. I would be shocked not to see Chalk immediately picked. Maybe not banned necessarily. I think teams want to still try him out and see how they could play against him. I'm very curious to see who's going to be the first one to whoop out the Chalk.
Jungle.
And look at
Jungle.
yeah.
I do love me some Chalk jungle. That might be something that happens too.
Though I think with Sino being in SCC, probably not.
Shame.
You never know. Scream is in the SPL. So
Dang, I just realized that's also gonna, like, with the ESET change, that's also gonna buff Sino's SCC play. Like completely off topic from SPL, but like Sino, who was already playing ESET jungle, now he gets more protections on the ultimate. Maybe I don't know. I don't know if we see a lot of ESET play even more than what we already have, just because nothing else changes her. It's just 5% extra mitigation on the ultimate, but who knows? Maybe that's enough for people. Although like big burst damage ult securing gods aren't really the meta right now. Like we saw one Kukulkan and one Raw this phase. So like nobody's really caring so much about big burst damage secure. They just want gods who are good at applying anti-heal.
Well, I'll tell you what, if we're seeing more Stone of Fall, Jean Kui from Final King, the solo lane, we're probably going to see a little bit more ESET as well to deal with that big Jean Kui AoE damage, mitigate all of it, honestly, and maybe get some shells while you're at it. So who knows what this meta holds for us. But maybe we'll see some Sylvanas. I definitely think we're going to see a lot of Ullr with these changes to the items and a little bit of the power scaling on his one. I think, some of these hunters might be a little bit bored, let's say, of playing too safe, too many ROMs being picked here. Let's see some bait of the ROM and play the Ullr and try to just straight up win 1v1.
I think if I know hunters well, they're definitely tired of not getting in there. They are all about the 1v1, and they hate when someone comes to ruin their 1v1 opportunity. So hopefully, and I think Ullr is sort of like the king of that, I think, style of playing of like, respect the 1v1, just let me kill by the opposing ADC here, because I'm Ullr, So glad that maybe we'll see a little more spiciness in the dueling, let these supports go elsewhere and do whatever they want. Anything else you guys want to talk about here? Maybe just about Smite or SPL in general, or doesn't have to be about the patch, or are we ready to do our outros and stuff like that?
Small thing, I think, funny enough, and I think it may have been also highlighted on one of the death segments. When we interviewed Shinto at the end of Leviathan's first set win, Shinto alluded to the fact that we may see some hunters mid, and I think he could be like really correct with that. Ullr gets buffed. Ullr was playing a lot of mid at some point. Even Paul has. Well, I mean, Paul's Ullr is legendary amongst the Smite scene at this point.
Yeah.
So we might see some Ullr. Neath was already kind of being played mid, especially by like players like Zeros. So maybe we see some more Neath. Chiron was kind of on the cusp of like, do we play him? Do we not? Especially with like the bow build that came through, like it kind of pushed him away. But now that a lot of Chiron's damage sources are going to be getting a bit of a buff, I think we could potentially be seeing some hunter mids maybe at the earlier stages of this phase. Maybe not right off the gate we see a hunter mid, but I think maybe somebody brings it out.
Thanks for watching the SPL Rundown this week. Be sure to catch us every week before the SPL on twitch.tv/SmiteGame. And of course, if you want to catch extended cuts or past episodes of our show, be sure to check those out on our YouTube channel. Just search APAM Productions on YouTube. If there's anyone you want to see on the show, be sure to DM me on Twitter at APAM2 or at APAM Productions. We'd love to hear from you guys, and we try to fulfill those requests as much as possible. Finally, I want to give a huge shout out here to my wonderful guests who have joined me and give them a chance to promote themselves a little bit here. Totally, why don't you start us off here? Where can people find you?
You can find me at twitter.com/IG Anatoliy and on my new Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Toliy, TOLIY.
JMac, where can people find you?
You can find me on my Twitter at _JmacTucker and on my Twitch at twitch.tv/JmacTucker. And always, whenever you go there, make sure to pop in the command homies. Just always show some love to some of my other boys.
Finally, Vonnie, where can people see what you got to say?
You can find me on Twitter at Vonnie Balboa, or much to your favorite streamer's annoyance, hinting their ring games.
I want to give you guys my deep appreciation. It was a great conversation we had, so thank you guys so much for coming on. Thank you guys for watching as well. We hope you guys tune in and see us next week, where we'll be back breaking down week 2 of phase 3. So we hope to catch you guys soon. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.